Hello YouTubers, Joe Kersey here on Friday, March 20th, 2015 at 15:40 in the afternoon, Eastern Daylight Time. Now I was just trying to, run through my various Facebook things, and Lord knows it's hard to find anything on that anymore, but that's okay. It's a way to pass the time in a way. And I ran across this thing from it was a note to a physical education teacher. It was like an excuse note to a physical education teacher, and this is obviously in England somewhere, the United Kingdom somewhere, and the woman, wrote this note and says, I want to ask you to excuse whatever her daughter's name is, from PE, physical education today. She's asked me to write this note. It says, she's perfectly okay to take physical education today. The problem is she's just bone idle and is complaining that it's too cold outside. Sincerely, says, please return this note to, whatever her daughter's name is, after you've read it. And this got me thinking about so-called physical education in general. More generally known over here in the United States as gym class. Although, essentially there was, never any gymnastics done. Well, and just as well, too, because, in reality, if they tried to do that, they would have had, 18 people, in striker frames with C-spine injuries, It came close enough a couple of times on the trampoline for that, I remember one time landing on my neck the wrong way on this trampoline, and I couldn't feel my body below my neck for about 40 seconds, and that was a scary moment for me. I'll tell you that right now. But anyway, physical education, gym class. Now in 8th grade, junior high school, 8th grade, we had a guy, and I won't tell you his name. He's probably still alive. He'll probably come and get me if I say his name. But this guy was your quintessential thug. No, that's not he wasn't black. This isn't a racial thing. He's just a thug. He was a white trash thug without the tattoos. Very few school teachers in that era were hired with visible tattoos. And in gym class, you sort of see people's skin such that you'd know if they had tattoos or not. He was one of these guys that had one of these, flat top haircuts, and he's one of these big, beefy. His wife also was a very impressive individual of white trash background. There were a few scars on her from what were clearly had been knife fights. More of her non, but this guy loved to humiliate his students, quote, students, unquote. When I was in 8th grade, we had a sadistic gym teacher who had a fetish for publicly humiliating and mistreating his students. For example, flicking a guy's cigarette package out of his shirt pocket with a paddle, and when he bent over to pick it up, nailing him with the same paddle. That was one of his favorite maneuvers. And there was one guy that, he nailed repeatedly. I mean, this guy, he was a harmless enough guy. This guy. And all he did is he just liked to smoke cigarettes. And he carried, unfortunately, he was dim-witted enough to carry his pack of cigarettes in his shirt pocket so that he could be, it could be seen through his shirt pocket, and the guy would take this wooden paddle and flick it out, and then when the guy bent over to pick it up, he'd wham him with the paddle. That was one of the milder things this guy did. Because he had a talent for organizing sanctioned violence. To wit, I will tell you a little bit about it. He also enjoyed having the guys play repeated games of prison ball. Now, prison ball was a dodgeball variant. A perverted dodgeball variant that was played with the players moving about on the floor in a crab position. That's one of those things where you sort of have to, hold your hands down there, and you're sort of walking up with your belly, up, and you're moving about slowly. And the idea is that you can then drag another player back to the prison area, but if for some reason you acquire control of this ball, then you're allowed to stand up and just plummet, just pummel somebody with this ball, and then bodily, without having to get back into the crab position, drag them back into this prison area. Meanwhile, of course, there's a certain amount of extra-mural violence going on. But only permitted to rise to a standing position to bang the ball down directly on an opposing player. When struck, such player was allowed to be then dragged back bodily to the prison area. And of course, there's a little extramural pummeling and physical abuse that went on during the journey. Well, you can guess who was one of the prime targets for this. For various reasons. None of which we need go into here, but I imagine there might be. I don't think it was a gay thing. I mean, it was just people didn't like me. One day I was so messed up that it took me 15 minutes to go down the hall to my science period, which was the next class after gym class. Now, Mrs. Catchpole, God bless her, she's dead now. Her husband taught high school physical education, and he was the complete opposite of this kind of fellow. I mean, this guy, Mr. Catchpole was a wonderful individual, and I don't know if he's still alive or not, but he's a wonderful individual. I have not a bad word to say about that man at all. And unfortunately, she was killed on the edge of a road in New Mexico when they had been on vacation, and they had stopped to change a tire, and she was out helping her husband change a tire, and a car ran her down. It was night. That was very sad. Well, for all concerned. And, and of course, then her son, too, who was also a top-notch individual. My teacher was appalled. Her husband taught high school PE, but said nothing. But she said nothing at the time. When I got home, obviously I had to explain the very evident physical state I was in. Amazingly, my mother, of all people, swung into action, and, delaying her arrival at her work the next morning — she taught first grade in the same school system — swung into action and took me to the principal's office at my school and demanded something be done about this individual. And surprisingly, there was some action taken. The guy didn't keep his job much longer. This completely surprised Of course, I had bruises all over me. I mean, it was one of the few times she ever demanded that I completely undress so she can see my bod. Particularly at that stage of the game. When I was almost 14 at that time. Because I had skipped a year, so I wasn't quite as old as some of the other guys in 8th grade. And so she saw the bruises all over me. I was just, I was black. I had, the reason I was crawling down the hall and I was crawling down the hall toward the end when I was trying to get to my next class, was because the bruises were so big that, I just couldn't, it was so painful to move. So eventually this fellow was out of there. Now his wife, as I mentioned, was equally sadistic. I remember seeing being in a study hall that she was monitoring, and the fight broke out between two girls, and it was one of these real hair pulling fights, between girls. As only that can happen between women when they fight, and chunks of hair were coming out, chunks of scalp were flying out, blood was flying around. As a side note, both of them ended up in state prison. One of them for second-degree murder and the other one for involuntary manslaughter. And I can't remember which one was convicted of which. But she was cheering them on. And then I say, well, I guess they did teach us something of a sort. So such is life, in the public school systems. Well, at least in, 1965 or 6. All righty, bye-bye, YouTubers.